All right, welcome back to the Branson broadcast. Today we're going to talk about part 2 of why I don't believe in evolution. The first part dealt with, the universe coming into existence out of nothing, and how all of the resulting explosion, to call it something, formed all of the atoms and the elements and the stars and planets and everything that we see. That was part 1. Today we're going to talk more about the appearance of life, the beginning of life, and the development of life, which are two different things, and both, I think, have very serious problems for the naturalists. It's clear, and it's been known for 300 years, 350 years, since that one guy did this experiment. It is well known that life does not come from non-life. So there have been various experiments that have proven that this is not true. Now you might say, well, but these are flies. These are highly developed organisms. We're talking about something more basic, the original life. Well, something more basic like what? An amoeba? I mean, here we've got the contractile vacuole, the ectoplasm, endoplasm, the cell membrane, all of these things. Maybe you're talking about an amoeba or a bacterium, an animal cell, plant cell, whatever. I mean, this drawing looks fairly simple. I mean, here we have, something that's a reddish color, over here orange color, here a blue color. These things are like a million times more complicated than these drawings would suggest. In fact, down here, if you look at the flagella, and over here at the motor, this motor spins, and that allows the flagella to move the bacteria through space, through wherever it goes. Well, this motor is people have compared it to an outboard motor on a fishing boat, for example. It can spin at 100,000 RPMs. I did not stutter. I said 100,000 RPMs. It can stop and reverse course in 1/4 of a turn and start spinning 100,000 RPMs in the opposite direction. I mean, that quickly. So these are not simple organisms, apart from the difficulty of having them appear out of nothing. Whoops, there we go. But imagine they're in the primordial ooze, whatever, the primordial soup, I guess they call it. Lightning strikes and hits something, just exactly right. Exactly the right combination of elements or substances or whatever you want to say, and life miraculously appears. Then what happens? So you've got the original. I was going to say that it is so unlikely that this is going to happen, that this would happen, right? That life would come from non-life. So, but let's say for the sake of argument that it did happen. Now, it is so unlikely to happen that what we're going to do is we're going to concede one cell, right? Because for lightning to strike this and suddenly, there's 5,000 or 5 billion living cells is just, one cell is already beyond imaginations. But we're going to concede the fact that one cell gets, I was going to say created, I don't want to, formed, let's say, comes into existence. There, that's what we want to say. So lightning strikes, whatever, and, and one cell comes into existence. Then what happens? It splits in two. Okay. Have you ever thought about what a crazy thing that is to have happened? It's like, there it is, and suddenly, hey presto, there's two of them. Why? Does that make any sense? When have you ever just looked at a thing and suddenly it split into two things? This apart from the fact that, okay, that first cell was, I mean, it came into existence. Fortunately, it was close enough to, a food source, glucose or whatever, and it wasn't too close to something that burned it up or was caustic or killed it almost immediately. It survived long enough to split into two. Fascinating. I don't think most people ever think about what a mind freak that is to have happened. A cell splits into two for no apparent reason. Anyway, let's move on. This happened, they tell us. Notice this is million years ago. So 4,000 million, of course, is 4 billion years ago. We have the earliest known life. Okay? Then, so there it exists as single-celled organisms for a while until we get up to here, which is about 1.5 billion years ago. So we're looking at a difference of about 2.4, 2.5 billion years. Life exists as a single-celled organism. See here it says earliest multicellular life. All right, so it's already crazy enough that they split into two. Why would they start working together now suddenly to form organisms that all of the cells need each other in order to survive? Well, I'm not sure what the evolutionary advantage is there, if we're to believe survival of the fittest. But anyway, so we had 2.5 billion years from the earliest known life to the earliest multicellular life. But now we're going to talk about something called the Cambrian explosion. This is not another Big Bang type thing. Simply what that refers to is that at this point in the evolutionary time scale, suddenly a lot of animals, or a lot, let's say life forms, I guess would be more, because we're talking about plants and everything. So a lot of different life forms suddenly began to appear. So it's like literally the life exploded, and there became a lot of different forms, like I said. So we want to look at something that happened up here in the dinosaur section. I mean, we often think about, when we talk about evolution, we think of man as being the pinnacle of evolution. Oh, and it took, 4.5 billion years to arrive to us. Well, okay, it took 4.5. But let's look at a particular creature that is called the Argentinosaurus winculensis. We're just going to call it the Argentinosaurus. I have no idea how to say this word. But if you notice, this is 5 meters. So I think, if I remember right, this is about 30 meters long, about 90 feet long. Maybe another 4 or 5 meters. No, what am I saying? 5 or 10 meters tall. These are some average quantities that I found when I was investigating the thing. This is supposed to be the largest land animal that has ever been discovered. Right? So let's compare it to a typical adult male, such as myself. There I am, see? So if the Argentinosaurus weighed 60 tons and a typical adult male weighs about 200 pounds, that means the Argentinosaurus weighs, if I get this right, 600 times more. And the average adult male has about 37 trillion cells in his body, and the Argentinosaurus weighed 600 times more. So just in general terms, in basic math, 600 times 37 trillion, you get this number, 22 quadrillion cells in the Argentinosaurus. 22 quadrillion looks like this. There's a lot of zeros. In our previous session, we talked about something septillion, I think. But anyway, I love the big numbers. But this is a number we can't even imagine. But what is clear is that we're talking about an increase of genetic information, right? You went from one cell for 2.5 billion years, and then in only 1.5 billion years, you have this creature that has 22 quadrillion cells. How does that happen? Well, let's think about that for a little bit. Evolution wants us to believe that, all of these things happen little by little, but you have to consider that every characteristic of every living organism has to be programmed, right? Here we have a beautiful border collie, very similar to my own, by the way. But if you look at all of his hair, the genetic code for this animal is not, there's not one small section that says, put hair on the body. Every single hair has to be programmed. And unless you want to tell me that all of the characteristics of every living organism was present in the original cell, and man, would that require a lot of DNA, then you have to explain how we went from one cell with its limited information to this with a lot more information. So we could think about all of the hair on a dog or any other creature for that matter. We could think of this is a lion's tongue, which I look at these rows of spikes or thorns, or whatever you want to call those, and just look how organized it is, symmetrical. And then, of course, they have their own hairs and whiskers. All of this has to be programmed. Whatever machine is inside a bee's tail to make this wax has to come into existence. The feathers of a peacock. Now, most of us look at this and say, wow, how beautiful is this? I seem to remember reading that Charles Darwin, the famous father of evolution, this animal gave him night sweats because he thought, how in the world does something like this happen little by little over time? Even he couldn't understand or think of how that might be. And then you have other things like butterflies and the flowers that he's landing on. Butterflies, really. You basically have their metamorphosis where they go from a worm. I know it's not a worm, but you go from that thing. It hides out in this little sleeping bag that it creates by itself, and then boom, it turns into this. How does that happen? How does that evolve little by little? Nobody can explain that. And then if you really want to get crazy, go under the ocean where you can see things that, are they animals? Are they plants? We don't know. Well, we do know, but just looking at this, it's not terribly clear. But again, all of the characteristics that you see have to be programmed. And all of that is an increase of genetic information. So let's talk about how that can come to be, or at least how the evolutionists explain, the naturalists explain that happens. So here on the left we have the famous double helix of the DNA molecule, right? And all of these letters refer to the programming, basically. We don't need to explain everything. I think anybody who's watching this probably has a basic understanding of how this works. Anyway, so the double helix goes through a thing. I don't even know what it's called. But that thing basically unwinds the double helix and splits it into two parts. One goes over here, one goes over here. And they go through something called a ribosome. That's this blue thing here. It's not just coloring, it's an actual thing. And inside the ribosome, it looks at these letters, basically. They're I don't know what they are, but the three letters, the three letters refer to a particular amino acid. So here it reads GCA, and okay, so I want that amino acid, and it puts it into this string here, and then it reads the next one and another amino acid, and it goes creating proteins, right? And then the proteins create, it goes on to create chromosomes or genes. I don't know. But in any case, it goes copying all of these things. So, yeah, so now I need to, I have a video about that whole process, not this one. I'm going to put it full screen here. Now what you're seeing here is the double helix already untwisted and separated into two parts. So this is, you're going to see, so here in this blue thing, where's my mouse? See, it's going through there and it's splitting it off. And one side of it goes over here and it copies it directly. They say that one's easy, in quotes. The other side out here has to be, it has to be copied backwards. And so it has to do a lot of flipping around, and it's really a crazy process. I'll link this video in the description to my video so you can go and check that out. There's audio with it that I'm a boomer. I don't know how to get the video onto what I'm saying here. But now we're looking at a strand of the new DNA, and they said it's like various centimeters long, but only 2 nanometers wide. A nanometer is a billionth of a meter, so I mean, it barely exists, really. So anyway, that's, and so what they're saying is, so that all of this doesn't get all tangled up, it, whoops, what happened there? It wraps around these histones and does the things, and there it is. You saw briefly it said chromosomes, and here you see all of the different things being put together to create whatever, in this case, it's creating. I mean, I don't know. It could be hair, it could be part of the liver, toenail, I don't know, but they're creating something there. All right? So that, I mean, that by itself is an amazing process. So if we're talking about copying, yes, so the naturalists tell us that we get an increase of genetic information through copying errors, right? So one guy, I think it was Stephen Meyer, but anyway, it might be somebody else. He compared it to changing this sentence, "Methinks Dawkins doth protest too much." So you take that sentence and you have to change it like one letter at a time or whatever to get to this sentence, "But I'm sure Dawkins thinks he is right." Okay? So the question is, how do you get from "Methinks Dawkins doth protest too much" to "But I'm sure Dawkins thinks he is right"? Changing one letter at a time and having every sentence make sense. Because remember, when they're copying the DNA, they have to pull in different amino acids, right? But if you change one amino acid for the protein probably won't work. Why? Because it needs that particular amino acid to make that particular protein. If you change an amino acid, you have a different protein that maybe works, maybe doesn't. But what is sure is that the organism will not receive a protein that is functioning and one that it already knows how to use. Suddenly, that protein is not there. And that can cause some very serious consequences in the development, in the gestation or whatever of the organism, whatever it is, plant or animal. So how do you go from "Methinks Dawkins does protest too much" to "But I'm sure Dawkins thinks he is right" without really screwing up the organism? I don't know if they have an answer for that. But even more than that, this is only copying errors, right? But this is a limited amount of information. Imagine this is the information from the original cell, right? From the primordial soup. Well, to get to the Argentinosaurus, you would need to somehow write the entire biography of the thing. See, obviously, this is a lot more information. This happens to be not Charles, but Richard Dawkins' biography. This is page 1 or 2, by the way, of a 300-page book. So where does all of this other information come from? It's not just copying errors. How does a copying error add so much information? They don't explain that. At least I've never read or seen anything that even approximates a realistic explanation for all of this. So, wait, I wanted to back up here a little bit. So then Dawkins, this Richard Dawkins, one of the biggest apologists for the naturalist viewpoint, explained once how he thought the eye, for example, could evolve. And he said maybe there was, whatever organism, there was a set of tissue that was more responsive to light than the other tissues. And then slowly that started to become, it could identify shadows. And then instead of being flat, it started to curl up at the sides like a cup. And that continued and continued until finally it was completely closed. And, the lens was in there somehow. And so it was able to evolve. And he said that, this sounds like a complicated process, but if I remember right, he said this could happen in only 100 million years, right? Only 100 million years. So now I have another video here, if I can find it quickly. So here we're going to look at this is from Life, the first animated biology textbook series. And so they're going to look at something from a molecular level, and they're going to expand out, and we'll see what that becomes. So here you have subatomic particles, here you have elements and molecules, which make, elements, whatever. So you got these things forming, and then they get together and they form, they collect and form this thing, whatever it is. I don't know what any of these things are, right? But they work together, and apparently this thing goes through it all, and they're making stuff. And so then you have all of these other things. So those tubes are all full of those things. And then here you have, the yellow tubes and the red tubes and all of those. What in the world is all of that? Well, as they continue to expand out, boom, what you have is the eye, which clearly is much more complicated than I think even Richard Dawkins understands. So, I mean, how does all from the subatomic particles, they all have to start working together and accumulating to create this in only 100 million years, he said. Now, there's a further problem. Oops, here we go. I want the full screen there. So, so how does all of that happen? Well, as far as I know, our DNA is not changing while we are alive, right? If you grab this random monkey from the rainforest, is his DNA changing? No, as far as I know, it is established. In spite of any, science fiction movie you might have seen, our DNA does not change because we get bitten by a spider, for example. See, that just doesn't happen. Once we are formed, our DNA is established. So when is our DNA established? At conception, no? So nobody has explained this to me. I'm just kind of thinking out loud. If you want to comment below where I'm going wrong, feel free. I'll be happy to listen to your points of view. But the point is that in order for a copying error to lead to more information, I guess is what we want to say, then it has to come from the parents. So here we have a sperm cell, and let's say that miraculously and without any explanation of how it happens, this one particular sperm cell has an increase of genetic information that functions and will make the new organism slightly better than the father. Okay, one sperm cell with a characteristic. Well, it has to win the crazy race against all of the other 100 million sperm that are heading toward the egg of the female. But let's say, hey, this, our very special sperm cell, arrives to the egg and fertilizes it. Well, then what happens? Well, we get half of our DNA from the father, half from the mother, roughly speaking. So this one sperm cell has a 50-50 chance of having the new genetic information chosen or selected for the new organism. Okay, well, let's say that we're really lucky. It just happens, the naturalists tell us. See? Well, so then the offspring has to survive the gestation and the birth process, which is not always a given. Then, after they're born, they have to live long enough. I mean, how many of us saw a video like this when we were in, I don't know, 3rd or 4th grade, traumatized us for the rest of our lives? The turtles racing for the ocean, and here come the birds or whatever and eat some of them, and the seals when they get to the ocean finally. What's that? So they have to survive the first few hours of life or whatever. They have to grow up to, they have to live long enough to be able to reproduce, right? So they have to reach puberty, basically, I guess is the idea. Well, you better hope it's an alpha. I don't think this guy is going to be passing on his DNA. But anyway, so that has to happen. So he has to start reproducing, and the new characteristics, which, I mean, it just seems logical to me that since it only appears in this one specimen, that it would be a recessive gene, right? Well, somehow he has to pass that on to the next generation, the next generation, the next generation, until it becomes a dominant gene and leads to an improvement in the species in general. Now, we talked about, the improvement of the eye in only 100 million years. Okay, fine. It's not going to happen. It doesn't happen. But what I think Mr. Dawkins or Dr. Dawkins does not take into consideration is that the eye has to develop at the same time as the skeletal system, right? Because it kind of needs the protection around the eye. It also is dependent on the muscular system and the nervous system and the circulatory system and the digestive system, not to mention the respiratory system and the lymphatic system and the integumentary system, which I didn't even know what it was. Has to do with the skin, the hair, basically protecting the body, the human body at least. The endocrine system, which deals with hormones and other things, other internal organs, all of those have to develop more or less at the same time. The excretory system, and then everybody's favorite. So all of these systems have to develop more or less at the same time. With all of the organs, all of these require, several different organs. They all have to develop at more or less the same time, all through copying errors, they tell us. No, we need more genetic information. Where does the new genetic information come from? They don't know. So, to recap parts 1 and 2, in the beginning, there was no space, time, or matter. Suddenly, all three came into existence at the same time. Then the clump of matter, or quarks, exploded for no apparent or no known reason. As these quarks moved through space, they came together randomly to form protons, neutrons, and electrons. The protons, neutrons, and electrons came together randomly to produce elements. The elements came together randomly to form life, exactly one single-celled organism. This organism was able to live long enough to split into 2, which split into 4, etc., for about 2.4, 2.5 billion years. Later, these cells started to work in groups, forming multi-celled organisms. These organisms randomly began to accumulate more and more amino acids and proteins to develop randomly a massive variety of characteristics, hair and internal organs and toenails and whatever. In only 1.5 billion years, life developed from a one-celled organism to the 20 quadrillion-celled Argentinosaurus and everything in between, with all the variety of textures, functions, colors, organs, etc., that we see today, all with no intelligence whatsoever guiding it. Completely random. It just happened, the naturalists will tell us. And then accuse us of believing in fairy tales. Well, I don't buy it. Now, if you want to argue with me, go right ahead. But notice, in this video, I have not explained any other alternatives. So if you're going to say anything, make sure you stay on point and explain how some of these things happen. It would be very instructive to me and anybody else who might be interested in the topic. So that's parts 1 and 2 of why I don't believe in evolution. Next week, we'll start to explore other options. And that's all I'm going to say for the moment. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.